East Haven woke up to a sky the color of pewter, still, heavy, and quiet. The kind of morning that gives no warning of what it's about to take. Maya Daniels walked home from the corner store with a paper bag pressed against her chest, rain clinging to her jacket. She was humming a tune her son loved, one she used to sing to him as a child. In her mind, the day was ordinary. Her son, Jordan, had left for school hours earlier, 18, smart, restless, with a smile that could soften even the hardest days. But somewhere between her heartbeat and the sound of tires hissing on wet asphalt, the world shifted. Sirens. Then shouting. Then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't fade, it settles. It lingers in the bones. By the time Maya reached the corner of Lenox and Willow, the street was unrecognizable. Yellow tape fluttered like warning flags in the wind. A crowd pressed close to the curb, faces pale, eyes wide. A man whispered something, his words catching in his throat. It was that boy, the Daniels kid. Maya's bag slipped from her arms. Apples rolled across the pavement, bruising as they fell. She tried to cross the line, but an officer stopped her, a hand to her shoulder, firm and wordless. She could see the scene beyond them only in fragments. Blue lights, a shape on the ground, a uniformed man shouting into a radio. "Ma'am," the officer said softly, "you can't be here." But Maya's body didn't listen. Her world had narrowed to one question she couldn't bring herself to ask. Later, the official words would sound clean, procedural, almost rehearsed. Officer involved incident. Suspect resisted. Unfortunate outcome. But in that moment, there were no statements. No suspects. No reasons. Only a mother, and a silence that seemed to swallow the street whole. The hours that followed blurred together, interviews, forms, eyes that wouldn't meet hers. The local news vans arrived before the truth did. Reporters huddled under umbrellas, saying her son's name like it belonged to a headline instead of a heartbeat. Neighbors stopped by, carrying casseroles, questions, and sympathy she couldn't hold. That night, Maya sat in the living room, the TV light flickering across her face. She kept waiting for someone to call, the police, a friend, him. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every silence felt heavier. 2 days passed, and the silence still hadn't broken. It was the third morning when the knock came. Not gentle. Not kind. Red and blue washed through the curtains. Maya opened the door to find 3 officers standing on her porch. Their faces were unreadable, trained to be that way. One of them said her name. Another read her rights. She didn't understand. Not at first. But as they guided her out in handcuffs, cameras flashing across the street, the world that had already ended somehow found a way to fall apart again. In the days that followed, whispers grew louder. They said the officer involved had been found dead in his yard, a gun nearby, the details murky. And somehow, impossibly, the finger of blame pointed back at her. Maya Daniels, mother of the boy who died, was now accused of something she couldn't even name. Some called it justice. Others called it madness. But to her, it was still silence, the same silence that began on that gray morning and refused to let go. The hum of the hospital generator echoed faintly through the corridors as night draped over Burlington. Snowflakes pressed against the window panes of room 213, melting into soft streaks. Detective Laura Mayfield sat at the edge of the bed, watching the slow rhythm of the Ford drip beside her suspect, now a patient, and wondering how she'd become the villain of a story she had once sworn to protect others from. Across from her, Evelyn Ross stared blankly at the ceiling. Her wrists bore faint red lines from the handcuffs that had been removed when she collapsed during interrogation. The nurse had insisted she stay overnight. Laura hadn't argued. Something in the woman's silence gnawed at her, something that didn't feel like guilt. "You ever loved someone so much it hurts?" Evelyn asked quietly, her voice hoarse, eyes still fixed upward. Laura hesitated. "Yeah," she said. "But not enough to kill for it." Evelyn turned to her, and for the first time, Laura saw the full weight of the woman's pain. It wasn't rage nor madness, it was loss. "Then you don't understand," Evelyn whispered. Outside, the snow thickened. Somewhere beyond the hospital, police tape still flapped in the wind around the Ross farmhouse. Inside that house, somewhere between broken glass and blood-stained floorboards, lay answers Laura wasn't sure she wanted to find. When Laura returned to the crime scene the next morning, the house greeted her like a ghost. Every creak in the wooden floorboards whispered of a family that used to laugh here. Family photos still lined the hallway: Evelyn, her husband Daniel, and their teenage daughter Clara. The smiling faces felt cruelly frozen in time. She stepped into the living room. The stench of smoke lingered from the fire that had scorched half the couch. Blood specks trailed toward the kitchen. On the counter sat a cold cup of tea untouched. "Victim was shot twice in the chest," said Officer Ray Hollis, jotting in his notebook. "Gun belonged to Daniel. Found near the garden fence." Laura frowned. "And no forced entry?" "None. Looks like an argument turned bad." She knelt near a dark stain on the floor, the final struggle. Something about it didn't fit. "He was left-handed," she murmured, scanning the direction of the blood pattern. "But this angle, he couldn't have shot himself." Ray frowned. "You think she's telling the truth?" Laura stood slowly. "I think someone wants us to believe she isn't." Later that day, Clara Ross was found. Hiding, not from the police, but from her memories. She was discovered 2 towns over, in a friend's basement, clutching her phone like a lifeline. When Laura entered the small room, Clara flinched, her eyes rimmed with red. "I didn't mean to run," Clara said, trembling. I couldn't see him like that again." Laura sat across from her. "Your father?" Clara nodded, tears spilling. "He wasn't who people thought he was." The detective stayed quiet. Clara's voice broke. "He hurt Mom. Every night. And when she tried to leave, he said he'd make sure no one ever believed her. Not the cops. Not me." Silence thickened between them. Laura's chest tightened. She'd heard this story too many times in her career, but it never stopped cutting deep. "Did you see what happened that night?" she asked gently. Clara hesitated. "I heard them. Arguing. Then a gunshot. Then another. I saw Mom kneeling beside him, crying." Her lip trembled. "But she wasn't holding the gun." At headquarters, Laura replayed the neighbor's security footage for the 5th time. A faint flicker of motion in the corner of the frame, a figure darting through the backyard minutes before the gunfire. Too tall to be Evelyn. Too broad. "Can you enhance that?" Laura asked. The tech squinted. "Already did. Doesn't match Daniel either." The detective's pulse quickened. "So we've got a third person." "Or," the tech replied grimly, "someone who didn't want to be seen." Laura leaned closer to the monitor. The timestamp blinked 9:42 p.m., the same time Evelyn had called 911. Outside, snow fell heavier. Inside, a storm was building of another kind, one that could tear apart everything Laura believed about justice. Back in the station, Laura pulled Daniel Ross's financials. What she found chilled her: thousands in unpaid loans, hidden transactions, and messages to an unknown number labeled The last text read, "It's done. She won't get a dime. Meet me by the river." Laura's breath caught. "He was planning something," she muttered. When she traced the number, it led to Marcus Leary, a local contractor, and Daniel's estranged brother. Marcus had vanished 2 weeks before the murder. She stared at the screen, her reflection ghosting over the data. The puzzle pieces were shifting, but one truth glimmered beneath the surface. Evelyn wasn't a cold-blooded killer. She was a woman trapped in someone else's war. That night, Laura visited Evelyn again. The woman's eyes were tired, but her voice was steady. "You think I did it," Evelyn said flatly. "I think you're hiding something," Laura replied. Evelyn looked out the window, watching the snow swirl under the hospital floodlights. "He wasn't supposed to die. I only wanted to scare him, to make him stop." Laura said nothing. Evelyn turned, tears streaking her face. "But when I came back, he was already gone. Someone had beaten me to it." A week later, a fisherman found a frozen pickup near the Winooski River. Inside was a decomposed body, Marcus Leary. In his coat pocket, a torn piece of paper bore Daniel Ross's signature. The cause of death: gunshot wound to the abdomen. Laura stared at the coroner's report. 2 men. 2 bullets. 1 weapon. She closed the file slowly, a chill crawling up her spine. This wasn't a domestic killing, she whispered. It was a cleanup. As dawn broke over the mountains, Laura sat alone in her car outside the courthouse. The world felt heavy with what she knew, and what she still couldn't prove. Evelyn's trial was days away. The prosecution had a story ready: a jealous wife, a tragic marriage, an impulsive crime. But Laura had something stronger: doubt. She reached for her recorder and pressed play. Evelyn's trembling voice filled the silence. He told me once, if I ever tried to leave, he'd make sure my body would be found before his. Laura closed her eyes. Not this time, she murmured. The truth was close, tangled, painful, and dangerous. But she wasn't letting it die buried under snow and lies. The courtroom was a theater of whispers and judgment. Every seat filled. Every camera poised. Every breath held. Evelyn Ross sat at the defense table, her wrists free but her soul shackled. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead sounded almost cruel, as though mocking her fragility. Her dark hair, once immaculately brushed, now framed a face carved by sleepless nights and silent prayers. At the other end, the prosecution painted her as a woman scorned, cold, calculating, a murderer disguised as a victim. Their words slashed through the air like knives. Detective Laura Mayfield sat in the back, unseen, her badge turned inward on her lap. She was here not as an officer of law, but as a witness of truth. When the prosecutor flashed a photo of Daniel's bloodied body on the screen, Evelyn closed her eyes. A ripple of murmurs rolled through the audience. The judge called for silence. Mrs. Ross, the prosecutor said, did you love your husband? Her voice trembled. Once. Until he made me fear the sound of his footsteps. The courtroom fell silent. Even the walls seemed to listen. The defense attorney, a quiet, silver-haired man named Alan Greaves, approached gently. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He simply asked questions that made everyone shift in their seats. Mrs. Ross, he said softly, why didn't you leave? Evelyn's lip trembled. Because he said he'd find me. Because he always did. Alan nodded. Did you call the police? I did, she whispered. Twice. They told me to keep the peace. Laura's eyes burned as she watched. She remembered those reports, thin, vague, buried under dozens of other domestic disturbances. How many times had the system failed this woman before she failed herself? When the defense played the neighbor's footage, the shadow in the backyard moments before the gunfire, a collective gasp filled the room. The prosecution objected, claiming, poor video quality. But the image was enough. Enough to plant a seed of doubt, enough to whisper maybe she didn't do it. 2 days later, Clara took the stand. The courtroom buzzed. The daughter's testimony could make or break the case. She was pale, trembling, clutching a small pendant around her neck. When she spoke, her voice cracked. My father wasn't the man people thought he was, she said. He used to hurt Mom. The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge allowed her to continue. He told me once, if your mom ever leaves, you'll both regret it. Clara paused, her eyes welling up. That night I heard shouting. I ran downstairs and saw someone else outside, someone tall, wearing my uncle's coat. Gasps. Laura's heart kicked in her chest. Clara continued. When I got closer, I saw blood on his hands. He dropped the gun and ran. I thought my dad was dead, but then I saw Mom. She was screaming, begging him to wake up. She covered her face, sobbing. That night, Laura sat alone in her office, replaying Clara's words. She pulled out the case file and flipped to Marcus Leary's autopsy photo. The coat, the same pattern described by Clara. In his wallet had been a note, half burned, now sealed in evidence. I warned you. She gets nothing. This ends tonight. Laura leaned back, eyes heavy. Daniel hired his own brother to scare her, she whispered. But it went wrong. The puzzle clicked. Marcus had fired first, maybe to threaten, maybe to protect. Daniel fought back. In the chaos, both were shot. Evelyn found them seconds later. She didn't kill her husband. She found him dying. And the system, blind and hungry for closure, called her a murderer. The next morning, Laura took the stand. She hadn't planned to testify. But when the defense called her name, she knew this was her final chance to speak the truth buried under paperwork and procedure. Detective Mayfield, Alan began. Did you initially believe Mrs. Ross was guilty? Yes, Laura admitted. The evidence pointed to her. But evidence can lie. People can't, not when you know how to listen. He nodded. And what changed your mind? Laura looked straight at the jury. The angles of the gunshots. The neighbor's footage. The second man on scene. And the truth her daughter carried, a truth no one wanted to hear. The prosecutor tried to undermine her. Detective, are you saying your department made a mistake? Laura didn't flinch. I'm saying we mistook a victim for a villain. A murmur swelled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel for silence, but the shift had already happened. The narrative had cracked open. The jury deliberated for 8 long hours. Outside, the first rays of dawn brushed against the courthouse windows. Reporters whispered, lawyers paced, and Evelyn sat motionless, her hands clasped tight. When the jury returned, 12 faces looked upon her, a mixture of pity, fear, and quiet respect. The forewoman stood. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant not guilty. The room erupted. Evelyn didn't move. Tears filled her eyes, then spilled freely. Alan rested a hand on her shoulder. Across the room, Laura exhaled, a tremor of relief, of justice finally catching up with truth. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. For the first time in months, the sky over Vermont was clear. Weeks later, Laura received a letter in a plain white envelope. No return address, only a single word written in elegant cursive, "Thank you." Inside was a pressed rose, brittle and beautiful. She placed it on her desk, next to the case file labeled Ross, Evelyn, closed. In the quiet hum of her office, Laura whispered, "The fall of the rose," and she still bloomed. Outside her window, the thaw had begun. The river that once held secrets now shimmered in the sun. Evelyn Ross moved away from Vermont months later. She never remarried. Never returned to the old farmhouse. But every spring, a single rose bloomed on the graves of Daniel and Marcus Ross, wild, unplanted, defiantly alive. Locals called it coincidence. Laura called it grace. And in every whispered story told across the town, people remembered not the woman who was accused, but the woman who survived.